But Trump's motive here is simple. He wants to corrupt the Fed's independent process to basically give him MAGA markets. And so instead of looking out for all people in this country and what's best for the entire long-term economy, that's the Fed's job. That's why the law gives it power separate from the White House, just as judges don't report into the White House. Whether Trump likes it or not, there are whole parts of the federal government specifically with their own powers because this isn't a unitary state. So instead of that, Trump wants the Fed to give him a short-term economic sugar rush to artificially boost him and his party, the Republican Party, for these upcoming elections. I'm going to walk through this with you, and I think we have some interesting stuff to show you, including across history in this report. But bottom line, it's about power. It's about MAGA markets trying to interfere with what otherwise would happen in the real economy and the real electorate. Now, we can get into some of the economic details, but for now, that's the gist. Having a politician control the central bank breaks the law. It shreds the central bank's freedom if he got away with it. It obviously undercuts free markets. And for all the valid criticism of Wall Street and today's markets, one thing that Bernie Sanders liberals and conservative Wall Street leaders agree on is that politicians should not have more corrupt power over the independent central bank. Now, politicos tend to focus on politics, which we could define as the candidate strategies and pitches and their plans. Tonight, in our report, I want to broaden out, and some of this is, I think, just kind of interesting to look back over, because the iron law of elections across all history and geography in the modern era is the economy overrides everything. When the markets crash or times are tough, voters punish the party in power. Now, on the politics, you can actually measure voters' reaction to each of those crashes. Across decades of elections, in midterms and presidential years, angry voters will punish governments, the incumbents, over a bad economy. That is a truth that drives legendary political sayings that have become cliches, and many races you probably remember.
It's the economy, stupid.
America's wonderful, ain't it, Mr. Bush? Maybe you'll be unemployed.
We project that Bill Clinton is going to be the next president of the United States.
Obama blames Washington for the country's economic woes and is trying to link John McCain to President Bush's policies.
I had the honor of calling Senator Barack Obama to congratulate him.
The greatest economic year in the history of our country. You had three of them with me, and then we got hit with the plague.
Joe Biden is on track to be the next president.
A plague for people and markets. Biden's win was propelled by voters upset about the economy crushed by COVID. And some politicos might have overestimated what the voters were saying, as if it were an embrace of all Biden policies rather than concern about the crashing chart you see on the screen. And likewise, there are other politicos currently overestimating Trump's win just last year, which was also propelled by voters upset with high prices. The economy shapes elections more than anything else. History shows it. Political science shows it. And this isn't some new narrative that the media is just glomming onto during this new clash over the Fed this week. We report on this all the time in factual political coverage. Before the COVID crash, we reported how Trump was on track for re-election unless the economy fell. And then it did, and Biden beat him, as mentioned. And on 2024 election night, we were reporting on the trend of people voting against the incumbent party, the Democrats, because of high prices and economic concerns.
With the coronavirus that people are so scared about, how does that affect what's going on as far as with the Democrats, with Biden and even Trump?
During these kind of crises, especially if it gets worse, we'll see people tend to go, wait a minute, I need government. I think Donald Trump has a good path to re-election and a good economy.
He's probably going to
win. And maybe not in a bad economy.
When the economy is bad enough and that's front and center, people tend to vote against what they see as the incumbent party. In this case, you had an incumbent vice president. Is it that everyone gave Donald Trump a bigger hug because he closed so well? Or is it something we've seen from time going back to the beginning of elections that when people are mad about the economy, they vote against the incumbent? They vote against the incumbent. They vote against high prices. And in that case, they voted against the Biden-Harris administration. Now, no one can see the future, but history shows the trends. The president's party loses badly when the market crashes. Republicans actually gained a whopping 67 seats in the midterms after a post-war downturn. Democrats surged by over 60 seats in the recession of 58 and won 49 seats in 74 amid inflation that was so bad they called it stagflation, when high prices are worsened by job losses and negative growth. And that's just midterms, which is what Trump is bracing for in 10 months. Economic backlashes are even worse in presidential years. A lot more people vote. And here you've got some examples. Reagan won and the GOP gained 46 seats off that economic malaise I mentioned after a campaign where Reagan rattled off inflation data and his knowledge of the Federal Reserve. Notice that's back in the headlines now. He was doing it to pound Carter's economy.
To get a handle on inflation because in January, at the beginning of the year, it was more than 18%. Since then, he has blamed to the people for inflation OPEC. He's blamed the Federal Reserve System. He has blamed the lack of productivity of the American people. He has then accused the people of living too well.
That was then. And one of the most successful candidates in the modern era, Barack Obama, certainly won plenty of elections without riding a recession, but his biggest win, the first time he took the White House, we'll add to the chart, was when Democrats swept the White House, the House, and the Senate, with voters punishing the GOP for some of those clips I just played you earlier when Stephanie Ruhle was walking the carnage of the market floor, the housing crash, and what became the Great Recession. That's American politics, where we have elections every 2 years, whether the politicians like it or not. But as Donald Trump muses openly about a world without elections or where he has soldiers in the streets and unitary power, I would remind everyone that even autocrats abroad have seen that bad economies can topple their reign. Argentinian leader Perón was overthrown amid inflation and the economic problems in the 50s. Same story for Ferdinand Marcos and Mobutu Sese Seko. Rampant inflation drove the uprisings along with other factors. You can even go to the fall of Gorbachev and the Soviet Union. Of course, it was complicated, but it was the economic failure at home that weakened the dictator's control and created a more ripe environment for a protest movement where people risked their lives to ultimately topple the government. History shows why Trump's fixated on crushing Fed independence to control the economy right now, even as there's so much else going on. And he's doing it even if it angers powerful Republicans on Wall Street and brings the clash all the way up to the Supreme Court next week. So history has something to teach us, as well as how to win for those looking at democracy versus whatever autocracy others are pitching. Now, Trump and Republicans control the White House and Congress right now. I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but I'll tell you a couple things. They could pass laws to better regulate AI. They could tax just those richest companies for emergency bailout funds so that if we do face a crash, it's those companies on the hook for their bets instead of the predictable pattern of bailouts tapping working people and people who weren't even in the stock market. They could do that right now. You could literally put that fund aside, break the glass if they need it, and if they never need it, do whatever with it, or even yield some of it back to them. Republicans could regulate crypto to contain what is an obvious risk. Donald Trump once publicly called it a scam. But they're not doing that. They're not doing long-term economic policy work to benefit the general public. If that sounds like a criticism or an indictment, well, it is the fact, and I've shown you all of the receipts. Do with that fact what you will. Instead, Donald Trump takes what he once called a scam of crypto and is grifting hundreds of millions of dollars off that industry in his own let-them-eat crypto moment while people struggle to get by. Trump has shown he'd rather risk breaking the law, maybe even losing at the Supreme Court. He'd rather do that to cover his tracks with some short-term economic sugar high if he can get away with it. And Donald Trump knows all about the economy shaping elections. He was obsessed with that very political problem when COVID was tanking the markets. He knew it was a risk for him. He understood that math. At times, and Bob Woodward and others have told us about this and have recorded calls from the period where Trump was as concerned about the markets and the perception of the economy as he was about who was dying of COVID. And then he came back into office running against Biden on the high prices complaint. So now he wakes up every day fearing a midterm rout that could seal his lame duck fate at a time when Republicans have already voted him down on Congress, on Epstein, on health care last week. They're even planning a vote on the war powers that he's trying to use as his domestic powers clearly wane. Losing the midterms, which Trump's own RNC chair says is likely, would obviously hasten his political demise. It could also bring on more accountability. If Democrats are in the House, we have some memory of what that was like in the first term, the subpoenas, the probes, and if there is constitutional violations, maybe another impeachment. Maybe even one over pocketing foreign jets and hundreds of millions in crypto. Constitution says you can't take foreign gifts. He's been taking tons of them that we know of. Trump did not leave peacefully after his last loss either. So everyone must be ready for a sequel, a reboot, or a more extreme version if Republicans lose in 28 of the January 6th violence that Trump now backs and pardoned. So history can be grim, but it has lessons, and it shows clearly how economic unrest, the lived reality of the mass public, can, abroad and at home, congeal with informed protest for revolutions in any system of government that bring the power back to the people. It is those dynamics that have dislodged so many incumbents, even powerful ones, and even those who have very clearly shown they would end democracy if they could.